Hey, how's it going, everybody? If you're new here, welcome in. And if you've been here before, smash the like button on the way in. I'm Rollshambo, the connoisseur and collector of all things sharp and shiny. And today we're checking out another knife from our friends over at Fintiso. Now, if you don't remember, we recently checked out the Fintiso Cobra, a knife which I thought was pretty good for a new budget brand in this space, because let's face it, there is a ton of competition for budget knife brands right now. And ultimately, when that happens, we win, and we win because they have to continue to get better and better and remain at the same price point instead of getting just more expensive like we see with the rest of the market. Now, when I say that this is budget, I mean that on their website, this is currently $50 or $49.99. We'll call it $50 just to be copacetic. And I'm excited to talk about it because there is some features on this knife that are really, really attractive at this price point. Some things that you just don't normally see. But first, before we get into that, let's go ahead and talk about what exactly you get for your $50. Starting off with the deployment options, we have both a front flipper as well as a deployment hole, and that deployment hole you can reverse flick or you can go ahead and thumb flick. Both are readily available options. Now, it comes in a couple different color variations. You can get it in like an orange and black, white and black, kind of a stormtrooper aesthetic, and then this green and black. The handle scales are made out of G10, and then of course on the blade we have this blasted 14C28N. It features a stamped steel pocket clip that is insert into the scales with flat pocket clip screws. Can I get an amen? Look, I like things like this because these are features that you don't necessarily always see on more budget-oriented knives, especially when we start talking about the things that really count as far as the little details. You might be noticing that the insides of these handle scales are milled out for some extra weight relief. We're looking at about 3.7 ounces, and I did identify a typo on their website. They said that this is about 7.23 inches overall, when in reality it's going to come in more like 8.23. So Fintiso, if you're watching, if you're listening, go ahead and update your website. 8.23 inches is the correct length. Otherwise, everything else looks pretty good. They say that the grinding edge angle on this is about 18 to 20 degrees, and I believe it. The edge feels right and tight. It doesn't feel like a super thick edge, and the finish is nice. We have a nice swedge here at the top, which goes across about 3/4 of the length of the blade. And speaking of the blade, something that you really don't see at this price point often, but it's always a joy when you do, is a crowned spine. That means that the crown is rounded over. But not only is it crowned, it's also jimped and crowned, which is great, but it's also necessary since this is a front flipper. Now, the action is really crisp. The detent is nice, and because it has multiple deployment options, the detent on this one is actually tuned, in my opinion, more towards the deployment hole than the front flipper, and that's because it's a bit stiffer. If you didn't know, when you have multiple deployment options, the issue that a lot of companies face is, what do you tune the detent towards? For example, front flippers generally operate better with a lighter detent, whereas something like a deployment hole generally operates better with a stiffer detent. And that has to do with the fact that on a front flipper, it's not necessarily that hard to bring this around. You don't necessarily want there to be a whole ton of pressure there. In this case, they actually pulled it off well, because even though it is tuned more towards the deployment hole than the front flipper, you get a really crisp action on that front flipper deployment. So if you're someone that really does enjoy fidgeting with your knives, and I know some of you are cringing like, oh, you would fidget with your knife. How dare you? The sacred art of carrying a knife. How dare you? Well, I'm here to tell you that some of us are just deplorable like that, yours truly included. You can get a lot of use out of a knife and still have fun with it at the same time. So you're not going to get any hate from me on that level. The deployment is nice. It's running on ceramic bearings with that really crispy detent. And the pocket clip itself, just so you know, is unfortunately not reversible. I know, lefties, I'm sorry. But in this case, it's just not. For the body screws, we are looking at T6 body screws, and then of course a T8 pivot. We've got this little bit of gearing going on right over here, which is kind of cool. You know, I don't mind a little bit of extra flair as long as it's not overdone. But speaking of a little bit overdone, we've got some bling going on here on the end of these shadow box steel liners. So check this out. They are claiming that these are white zircons. Now, I don't know if that is true or not, because if in case you didn't know, I looked it up, but apparently white zircons are about $250 to $450 a carat. So if those are real white zircons, I'm kind of skeptical that we would get them on a $50 knife. But I'll say this one time. I think that while we like flair in the knife world, and while there's a lot of opportunity to do really cool things with knives, I don't know if I would put gems on a budget knife. And that's just my honest opinion. I think that it could come across as tacky to a lot of people, but some people might enjoy that. Maybe this ends up being, you know, a knife that you get for your significant other because they like stuff like that. Or maybe you just want a little bit of pocket jewelry. As with all things with budget knives, the key difference maker is going to be the fit and finish. How well was it manufactured? You know, how are the QC items? Because on less expensive knives, we typically tend to see some QC item issues because they are cheaper knives and they can get away with stuff like that. Well, let's start off with the lockup and lockout. That's actually very solid. That feels right and tight, very well locked up. It is a liner lock, of course. I'm going to say that that locks up somewhere around the 25% range, which is adequate for this knife. The knife does drop shut onto your fingernail and it feels nice and smooth. There wasn't really a break-in period there either. The blade centering is going to be perfect. No issues there. And it is an open back design with barrel spacers. And one thing that they did right, I will say this, they put the lanyard hole in the post between the scales instead of putting them through the scales. Ergonomics feel really good. These scales feel contoured, and so they rest really naturally in your hand, and you can get a nice grip on it as well. There is no choke up point here, but the blade being just over 3.5 inches, I do feel like they could have put one in there, and that would have given us a bit of extra control. That's not an issue in my opinion at all. It's just a personal preference. As far as indexing is concerned, the balance on here is great, and I have no issues in either a reverse grip or in a regular grip. Everything feels nice and comfortable. I, of course, would like to see this in an aluminum finish as well, just because I'm a big fan of aluminum on more budget-friendly knives, especially with these steel liners and a liner lock. I think that that would just take it to the next level, but I'm not mad at the G10 either. G10 is a great material. It's very resistant to things like heat and wear and tear. Have you ever gotten a scratch on your G10 knife handle and then just, you know, use your thumb to rub it away and poof, it disappears? It's not something that's often talked about with knives that have G10 handle scales, but it is nice, especially on a contoured handle scale like this. The rounding of the edges actually reminds me a bit of how they rounded the edges on the G10 Spyderco Shaman scales. So that is, of course, very nice. Now, is it a perfect knife? No. I did, of course, complain about the bling on the handle scales, and I'm also going to complain about T6 body screws.
I'm tired of this, Grandpa.
That's too damn bad!
As a budget brand, I truly think that to stand out, you've got to take it to the next level. And I don't know if maybe T6 screws are just cheaper overall. I don't know why they would be or why that would be an extra expensive thing to put on a knife. But T8 body screws is the way to go. And the reason why is because T6 screws is responsible for 100% of the knife hardware that I've ever stripped. I've never stripped a T8 body screw in my life, only ever T6. So I will continue to raise that flag high in the air and wave it for all to see. Please, 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 T8 body screws, things like that do stand out, especially for budget knife. I think that fit and finish wise, this is actually pretty impressive. While it's not perfect in my book and it has a few nitpicks, ultimately at the end of the day, it's an example of a really good knife. Now the edge is decent. I would say that, you know what, you strop that up a bit, it would probably come a long ways. If you want to know how this cuts, I actually do have a piece of paper here for once. Yeah, that's pretty good. It's not the sharpest knife in the world. but it definitely comes with an edge that would shave the hair on your arm. I think that as a starting spot, this is great. I think that if you're someone that picks this up and you do enjoy fidgeting with your knives, or you enjoy things like a really crispy detent, front flipping action, this is going to be a knife that will be pleasing for you to carry. And in case you lose it, it's not going to be too big of a deal either, because they are only $49. So with that being said, overall, I do think that this is a win for Fintiso, and it's another one of those that I'm going to give my stamp of approval on, because in this price range, I've definitely encountered knives that I would like to carry a lot less than this one, and I did give this one a decent amount of carry time in the pocket as it stands. But now I'm curious what your thoughts are. What do you think of the Fintiso Rook? Is this something that you would like to pick up for yourself or for someone as a gift, or is it a pass for you? If not, why not? Let's talk about it in the comments section down below. If you enjoyed this review and you haven't done so yet, make sure to hit the subscribe button. And by the way, if you want to watch more awesome knife and EDC content, go ahead and click on one of the videos that pops up next.